Hi, I'm Emily Russell, Executive Director of the Human Trafficking Task Force for the Missouri Attorney General's Office. Human trafficking is a crime that can affect anyone. Traffickers prey on people of any gender, age, race, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, education level, or citizenship.
When we think about vulnerable populations, we often comes to mind are thoughts of children growing up in poverty, foster care, youth, runaway teens. Of course, then we have our LGBTQ communities, which are very vulnerable populations. But sometimes we don't think about single-parent households. Individuals, children growing up in single-parent households, maybe the mom's working 2 jobs. We also sometimes don't think about children growing up in households where maybe they have an incarcerated parent. Or an addicted parent. These things are vulnerabilities that can allow our children. But we also have our adults that are vulnerable. We have our adults that have maybe grown up in the foster care system, had runaway or juvenile detention pasts, and they can end up as vulnerable populations. The reality is anybody can be vulnerable.
So in labor trafficking, the most vulnerable population will be like foreign nationals. And these are the people most of the times who are undocumented. Also the poor people. Women, could be men, children who live in very poor areas. They are vulnerable to labor trafficking.
Here are just some of the indicators that you might notice in a person who's potentially being trafficked.
It can look like a domestic violence situation, malnutrition, substance abuse. An individual may not be making eye contact and may not be responding for themselves when asked questions directly. They may have an unusual fear or paranoia of law enforcement or individuals of authority. Lots of times this is something that they're coached and into, and it wouldn't typically be their natural response.
First of all, it's excessive work days and hours. So you see people working so many hours and so many days. That's out of the ordinary. It could be an indicator for labor trafficking. Also, debt bondage. For the poor, vulnerable population, they are taken advantage of by giving them debts that they can't pay. So that becomes an indicator for trafficking. They are deceived about the location, who they will work for, the employer. So, for example, they may be told, you know, when you're going to the United States, you work for a famous person, and people get deceived by that. They're enticed, they're thinking that they'll work for a famous person, and they fall into labor trafficking. Also, the city that they will live in, probably they'll show them pictures of big cities such as New York or Chicago. And in fact, when they come here, they'll work in very rural areas where they're isolated, because isolation is also an indicator for labor trafficking.
Some other indicators of human trafficking can include a person who is under 18 engaging in commercial sex acts, restricted or controlled communication, signs of physical abuse, malnourishment, and lack of health care, exhibit behaviors of fear, submission, anxiety, depression, tension, nervousness, hypervigilance, or paranoia. They may not be in control of their own money, identification, or other documentation. They're unable to leave their living or work situation, and that living situation may even be guarded. They seem to travel frequently or are unsure of their location. They are working off paying a debt to an employer, are living with an employer and or in a poor or crowded living situation, loss of sense of time or location, have numerous inconsistencies in their story and perhaps lie about their age. Answers to questions might seem scripted. Clothing doesn't match the season, and they may possess large amounts of cash, condoms, hotel key cards, prepaid cards, or false identification. Who are the traffickers? Traffickers are a diverse group as well. Anyone who is willing to profit off of another human being by exploiting that person's vulnerabilities can be considered a trafficker. They too can be any gender, age, race, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, education level, or citizenship. And sometimes they work in groups or have gang affiliations.
Situation could look like a domestic violence situation. It could be a boyfriend, it could be a husband, it could be a girlfriend. A trafficker could look like a businessman. A trafficker could look like a representative of a talent agency. Unfortunately, traffickers are very difficult to identify because their job is to deceive. They're masters of disguise. A trafficker, unfortunately, can look like anyone.
Labor trafficking trafficker looks like just an ordinary, respectable individual, citizen. And it could be someone who looks like your neighbor. It could be your boss. It could be someone you know who lives in your community, and they can be respectable, sometimes holding decent jobs, but there could be a human trafficker too.
In these cases, the traffickers could be anyone from a child's parents or siblings to someone they met online via social media apps. A trafficker may also appear to be a spouse or someone that person has a romantic relationship with. Now that we know more about what trafficking victims and the traffickers themselves can look like, how can we be sure if we're seeing a trafficking situation? If you can check one box in each column of an AMP model, you're looking at a trafficking situation. AMP is an acronym for Action, Means, and Purpose. Listed in the action column are the actions of trafficking crimes. These include recruiting, harboring, transporting, providing, obtaining, patronizing, soliciting, or advertising. Listed in the means column, we have force, fraud, or coercion. Important side note, since children cannot consent to commercial sex, the presence of force, fraud, and coercion is not necessary to define a sex trafficking situation involving a minor. And lastly, we have the purpose column, which lists commercial sexual exploitation or forced labor. If you suspect a trafficking situation, please report it to our tip line online or by calling 1-844-487-0492. If someone is in imminent danger, call 911 immediately. Check out our other educational videos and resources on our website.